this is, there's just slides and slides of stuff up here, and I may have to check my notes and all that. Feel free to stop me, to ask a question, raise your hand. I like interaction way better. I know everybody thinks I just like to hear myself talk. I mean, it's not that I don't like to hear myself talk. As I like to hear myself talk more when I'm talking in an interaction with people than just by, than just by myself. So, uh, stop, ask questions, something, and if there's something like, if there's anything, also anything from Joshua that you had question or comment or input, or like, why did you do it this way, or what about this thing, or you didn't talk much about this, and just fire away, and I'll do my best to field it. I enjoy that a great deal. So, I tell you what, this is super casual, super informal. Go back and forth, get food, enjoy yourself. But let's pray real quick and bless it all. God, thank you so much for the time to be together, to talk about your business. God, what a delight it is to be your children, about your stuff all the time. I pray that you would bless this time, that we'd have a good time, and that we'd learn some stuff and enjoy one another's company and be able to just give glory to you in all of it. In Jesus' name, amen. So, when I think of, so I'm a boy, and I still think boy thoughts and do boy things, even though I'm an older boy. But when I think of like ancient words engraved on something with like a magic kind of intent, or religious intent, I think of a weapon, like an old sword with some sort of, old runes carved in a sword, or some sort of a prayer in an old battle axe or something like that. Well, one of the oldest blessed by language artifacts that we have comes from southern Israel from about 1700 BC. And, oh, that is not it. What'd I do, Wayne? What happened to me? Apparently we're going to sing. Is it? I know what I did. Is this. This is an ivory, so it's engraved with sort of a prayer or depending on how you view it, depending on who it was engraved to, engraved either with a prayer or with a statement of magical intent. And it is a lice comb. The oldest that I know of, one of the oldest magical blessed things that we have is, and that's keeping it real, because it's not some fancy weapon, it's not some sort of fantasy thing. It's, may this comb root out the lice from the hair and the beard. That's what that says in Paleo Canaanite. And so sometimes our imaginations about the past are a little bit different from what they are. They had downright practical concerns. And a lot of the stuff we find is, in and of itself, maybe kind of boring, sometimes kind of hilarious, sometimes R-rated or more. Also, lots of archaeology stuff you have never seen because it doesn't get published because it's very, very R-rated. The ancients, especially the Romans and the Greeks, were, woohoo, man, not for children. Anyways, I've got a lot of stuff that I want to do, and it's not necessarily, I tried to put it in some order, but it's not really in order. It's things I've wanted to talk about, and I've meant to, and I haven't. I want to talk about the timeline for the Exodus and the conquest, and I haven't done much of that. I've said dates, but I want to walk you through, and probably you guys know this already, but if you don't, here it is. How we get to the dates that we get to for a lot of these things. In 1 Kings 6:1, we have it tells us that 480 years, or maybe in the 480th year, since they came out of Egypt, Solomon, I can't remember now, whether it's laid the foundation or finished the temple, one or the other. And so that gives us a hard number for the time that Solomon built the temple and the time of the Exodus. And it just so happens that Solomon's reign, the closer you get to the present, the easier a lot of archaeological dates get, right? Because you find more stuff. The older you get, the harder it is to dig up and find stuff. But by the time you get to Solomon's reign, there's a whole lot of other stuff that coincides really nicely archaeologically in the rest of the ancient Near East that you can use it to sort of peg a date to, right? And this date for Solomon's temple in 1 Kings 6:1 is probably about as good a date as you're going to get for something this far back of anything. I mean, it's probably within 18 months of the year that is talked about there. I mean, it's that good of a date. That's rare and kind of crazy, because when you think about it, anytime you get a year given to you, unless you also get a month given to you, you've got 6 months each way of wiggle room on your date, right? So if you're working backwards in chronology on dates, and if you don't have months in them, well, then you're starting to add you've got kind of a bigger and bigger rounding error as you go back. But this is pretty certain. So that 966 plus 480 gets you to 1446 BC for the Exodus, when they walked out of Egypt. You'll find, if you read commentaries and stuff, you'll find some people who advocate what's called a late date for the Exodus, which is about 240 years after that. I don't buy that, and I don't really think it deserves the time of day. So there you go. That's if one of y'all is really committed to the late day of the Exodus, you want to talk about it, I will. But it ignores this passage in 1 Kings to me, and it doesn't make sense from a person who believes the Bible is true to go pursuing something else when this already fits the archaeology pretty well. So then you take 40 years off of that from wandering in the wilderness, and that gets us to 1406 BC. Probably everything that we've done in Joshua so far is still 1406 BC. I mean, if you think about it, we're crossing the Jericho. We've got the battle of Jericho. We stay at Gilgal. We battle Ai. The Gibeonites show up. I mean, all these things are happening in just a few weeks and a few months. And so we're 10 chapters into Joshua, and we're probably 10 weeks in, maybe less. I don't know. And so all of the first part of Joshua happens there. We know that the whole campaign that Joshua has is a 7-year campaign, because it tells us that in the book of Joshua somewhere. But this very first part seems to just be rapid fire. The Canaanites find out, and they want to strike back, and there we are. So, this is just for fun. This is you got to be kidding me. Why would you do that to me? PowerPoint. Oh. Okay, so that A is not supposed to look like an A. It's supposed to look like a more crude version of the bull there. So I just want to talk about this again. The way the Hebrew alphabet came about is amazing. Some person in Egypt spoke something like Hebrew, could read hieroglyphics, and took 22 of those hieroglyphics and had the ingenious idea. I want to impress this on you. The alphabet has been invented one time in the history of mankind. One time. The phonetic alphabet has been invented once. And every alphabet, from the old runic alphabets of Northern Europe to Hebrew, to Greek, to the Latin alphabet, to the alphabets we use today, all the alphabets, they come from this guy who spoke some Semitic language and could read hieroglyphics, and had the ingenious idea to take 22 of those and make them correspond to sounds, so you could use those 22 consonants. They didn't have vowels. You could use those 22 consonants and make any word you wanted to make. And if you were to think of maybe the most revolutionary invention that has ever been, it's probably that. And it was probably a Jew. And it was, if it wasn't Joseph, it was somebody just like him, basically, who was educated, who spoke one language and knew the other and could figure it out and all that stuff. And that's about the time that it occurs. And so the word for bull in Hebrew is Aleph. And so the first letter of the alphabet, which is written like the bull, is Aleph. And that's where we get alphabet, Aleph, Beit. The first two letters of the Hebrew alphabet are alphabet, Aleph, Beit. And the first one is the bull. That's not really apropos of anything except this. The word for 1,000 in Hebrew is also Aleph. They had English has lots and lots of words. We have 7 words for everything, for every nuance you want out of something, right? You go to the source and you look up one word and you get 1,000,000 words for it. Well, they didn't have 1,000,000 words for it, partly because they weren't 3 languages glued together like we are. But they had a much, much smaller bank of words, and their words did a lot more double duty than our words do. So Aleph is 1,000. Aleph is bull, Aleph is 1,000, and Aleph is also a troop or a cohort of any number, right? And so when you read in the Old Testament, and I may mention it in passing occasionally, this to me is one of the most vexing problems of understanding some things in Scripture. When you see these gigantic numbers of Israel coming out of Egypt, those are huge. I mean, if you look at it and figure it up, I mean, there could be 6 million people coming out of Egypt, and that's really hard to wrap my head around. The thing is, a guy named Flanders Petrie, archaeologist over 100 years ago, sort of floated the idea that maybe when it says X number of thousands, it means X number of cohorts, right? Or something along those lines, because it's Aleph. And I could pull up scriptures and stuff, I don't know how to do it right now. You could pull up scriptures where Aleph definitely means a bull, right? Aleph definitely means 1,000 because we're counting money, right? And nobody is playing with just groups when it's counting money. And there's sometimes when when you just don't know what it is. So, I don't know. If you ever hear me say something about big numbers and go, it could be this or it could be that, that's why. And I don't know anybody who can prove it exactly one way or the other. All right. That's boring. All right. This has been graffitied over. There are a lot of problems with archaeology in the Holy Land, not the least of which is that there are people who vandalize and graffiti everywhere, and there always have been. When we get to Hazor, we're going to see that Joshua sets up some sort of a memorial stone there at Hatzor to commemorate what they did. This is almost certainly that stone, but people didn't know what it was, and it's been defaced and spray painted, and Palestinians do everything they can to destroy any archaeology related to the Bible, because in their mind, archaeology that validates the Bible validates the Jews' claim on the land. And so if they can wreck something that supposedly ties back to Scripture, then they'll take a shot at it. So, and kill archaeologists too. That happens. That archaeology is more dangerous in the last 20 years than it used to be. I don't know if you can see that or not. This is Toby's Easy Guide to Bible Names. I don't know why I threw this in there, but I think it's a fun thing. So, I love words, I love language, I love names. So, anytime in the Old Testament, when you see a name that has the consonants M-L-K in it, it doesn't matter what the vowels are. It's Malik, Malak, whatever. It probably means king. And so we're going to encounter Abimelech, right? Or maybe was Abimelech today, or was it next week? Anyways, Abimelech means my father is king, or something like that. So Abi, my father, Melech, king. So it's just fun. When you see Bible names, a lot of times the Jews in the Old Testament don't give people whatever their real name is. They give them some sort of name that designates what they are. Eglon, I think, is the one that is killed by Ehud, who's a left-handed judge, my favorite judge because he's left-handed. Ehud goes in and he stabs Eglon and he runs him through and he leaves him, and it's all this embarrassing, goofy story. Eglon means calf. Well, it's unlike, so he killed him like a fatted calf, right? And so there's the Bible. Instead of honoring this guy by remembering his name, they stamped him with a joke name so that everybody could laugh at him from now on. So you have stuff like that. So it's kind of neat to know what the names are. Anything with Yah, Iyah, Yah, Yi, Yo, Joe, all that those are Yahweh names, Yahweh's names. That matters because Israel didn't know about Yahweh as the name of the Lord until when Moses says, "Who shall I say sent me?" And he says, "Tell them, I am sent you." Yahweh. Well, actually, it's Yahweh as He is. God says, "I am." We say He is to Him, right? So Yahweh is He is. And so Israel didn't have anybody who had Yahweh names until after that moment. So all in the first 5 books of the Bible, there's only one guy who has a name based on Yahweh, and that's Joshua. And his name didn't start out as Joshua. Moses named him that. And so Joshua was the very first Jew to get a name based on the name of Yahweh. Yahweh is salvation. And that is a great testimony to the antiquity of the first 5 books of the Bible. Because if the first 5 books of the Bible had been a hodgepodge put together sometime after the exile by a bunch of different editors and everything, the way that some people say that it was, then you would have other Yahwist, what are called Yahwist names in the first 5 books of the Bible. The fact that there aren't any is strong testimony to the fact that the first 5 books of the Bible were written before Israel knew who Yahweh was. So, ZDKs, so Zadok means righteous or righteousness. Zedek, Zadok, anything like that. Nathan is gift. SML is ask, or Shemu, actually it's ask. Then Shemuel is ask of God. Samuel and Saul are funny. Samuel means ask of God, and Saul sort of means you ask for it, right? So there's lots of funny stuff like that in the Old Testament. Av or Avi is father, my father, Ben is son, Ben is understanding. We're going to run into Jabin, king of Hatzor, in a while, and his Jabin is just like Joshua's name, Joshua ben Nun and Jabin. So Jabin is a throne name like Pharaoh. It's not a personal name. It means he is wise, or he is clever, or he's cool, whatever, something like that. And that's why you'll see more than one Jabin in the Bible that you're like, is the Bible confused? Do they know who this guy is? Didn't we kill him 100 years ago? Well, yes, but it's like Pharaoh. Just another one pops up. Okay. What? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm going 90-0 here. Anybody got questions? I've just been like, I know you're somewhere in between nodding off and going, right? So it's a little bit of both at the same time. We'll skip that. We're going to skip Ugarit. Okay, all right. Well, so look at Ugarit. Ugarit is interesting. So way up north there, this is already north. You see the bottom is like Megiddo and Hazor, so we're already sort of northern part of Canaan anyways. But all the way up there's a city named Ugarit, and about 100 years ago, we dug this place up, and I think this is a shot from somewhere that they've dug up out of Ugarit. Was a major city in the 1400s BC. It was a huge major city with a huge center of Canaanite religion. And a whole lot of what we know about ancient Canaanites comes from what they've dug up at Ugarit. There were oodles and gobs of cuneiform tablets in Ugarit. The language that they spoke was similar to Hebrew. And so this is a crazy deal. When the Jews translated the Hebrew Bible into Greek around 200 BC, they translated, it's called the Septuagint. When they translated the Septuagint, there were some Hebrew words that they didn't know. And so they had to guess at. Not many. And context usually tells you what stuff is. But there are probably a couple places where they guessed wrong. Because it would be like if I handed you an original copy of Beowulf from, I don't know, 1,500 years ago and said, 1,400 years ago and said, translate it. You get some stuff right, you get some stuff wrong. I'd get more wrong than I got right. But some of the Hebrew is just so old that some of the people then were a little bum-puzzled by some of those words. Well, since Ugarit has been discovered, we found some of those words in the cuneiform tablets in Ugarit, and we actually may have a better idea of what some of those words are today than the folks who translated the Septuagint 2,200 years ago because of the discovery there. Because what happened is Ugarit was destroyed, it was covered up and sealed, and so it's like a time capsule to 1400 BC. And just opening things up is amazing. The stuff we know so much more about the archaeology of the Holy Land and ancient Israel now than I don't know, than 100 years ago anybody ever dreamed. This is Baal. Baal-Hadad. Baal is a title that just means Lord. That's why God later in the prophets tells them not to call him Baal anymore, because apparently some of the Jews are calling God Baal, meaning Lord, and he's like, I don't want that associated with me, so you're not going to call me Baal anymore. But this is Baal-Hadad. Almost all the Baals you hear about in the Old Testament are Baal-Hadad. He was their main guy, and you see him pictured here with this little lightning bolt that's broken off in the years past. This other statue here is the king of Ugarit, and, it's Baal. The big one is Baal, and the little sort of baby right there by him is the king of Ugarit, which in the idea is that Ugarit is Baal is sort of the patron of the king of Ugarit. Also, the little lightning bolt. Anywhere in the Bible, in the Old Testament, where God does stuff with the storm or lightning or any of that stuff is in your face to Baal, because he was the storm god, right? And you can follow it. You can follow it to Apollo, and you can follow it to Roman gods. You can follow it up north into Europe to Thor and Odin, and all that stuff. So it all tracks back to this guy. Man, I really am all over the place. Okay, that's all right. We're just going to be all over the place. The Amarna tablets are one of the most amazing things. They dug up a cache of bureaucratic notes. Bureaucrats are archaeologists' best friend because they write down everything so that they can cover their butt, right? That's what bureaucrats are all about. Is they got to cover their rear end, and in order to do that, then you put it on paper and you save it. And so there is a treasure trove of communications documents that were to Akhenaten, Amenhotep, and Tutankhamun, all in the 1300s BC. And there's hundreds of them, I think 380 odd, something of them. And a good chunk of them are from the kings of these little cities. And I mentioned it before, but I want to show it again. From the kings of these little cities, and early on in the conquest, they're writing stuff like the Habiru, Hebrew. That's all of the liberal scholars and mainstream scholars like, there's no way that Hebrew has anything to do with Hebrew. Are you kidding me? It's ridiculous. That denying that it's exactly the right people at exactly the right place, doing exactly the right things, and you're going to tell me that Hebrew is not their sort of conflation of Hebrew. So the Hebrew are now attempting to take Jerusalem. That's Amarna tablet number 287. And these little kings are writing letters to Pharaoh, and they're saying, where is my lord Pharaoh's chariots? And if you don't send archers, then this city's going to fall, and there's not going to be anything left for you. And all of these things, letter after letter after letter after letter, validates everything that the Bible tells us about Joshua's conquest. And it's just all laid out there. So this guy right here, www.bible.ca, is a nut, but I love his site. If you look, it's just all too busy and it's all too crazy. And he's got all these tablets with translations written on them in giant letters like this, and it's all a mess. I was going to put a bunch of them up here, but it's just so crazy looking at it that there's no use in it. But if you want to go to Bible.ca and you want to see some of this stuff, this guy is an obsessive who's cataloged it all. And he's great, but like I said, he's a nut. The Amarna letters, just like the side of Jericho, massively validate the story of the conquest. When I was in college, this is at Abilene Christian University, Acapella Church's flagship Bible college, right? Amongst the professors like preachers talk about stuff a certain way amongst themselves that they don't necessarily talk about around everybody else. All the preachers out there, if they're watching, are mad at me now for telling that. All the professors, when you just get them tight, I don't think any of them believed that, except maybe a couple of the old crusty people who were just kind of hanging on from other places. I don't think any of them believed that the conquest happened the way the Bible says it. And if you don't think if you think it could be that way in conservative, Acapella, Church of Christ, Bible school, let me tell you, it can be anywhere. It's probably way more common to find PhD Old Testament scholars who don't believe that the conquest happened the way the Bible says it is than the ones that do. I bet it's probably 10 to 1 on Old Testament PhDs. And that was what I was taught, sort of underneath everything, right? That was what I was told, that there's no evidence that a conquest happened. Certainly not any evidence that it happened in the 15th century BC. No evidence that there was a coherent people that were Israel. Some people sort of wandered around and sort of found their way, sort of collectively, communities of people wandered their way and slowly over a period of time peacefully displaced the population of Canaan. because they were so similar to them that they could just work their way in, which basically just says the Bible's nonsense. Because if you don't have the conquest, like you don't have anything. It all just unravels. But all of this stuff, we know way too much about this stuff now for anybody to be casual about it. Another reason why I couldn't go back to school and get another degree, because I'd be too much trouble. This is the Maraneptah stele. It is a monument put up by Pharaoh of victory, right? And that's what they do. Pharaoh would win some military victory, and he'd put up a big stone and write on it how great he was. Am I not awesome? That's just the way of Egypt and its pharaohs. This one dates to about 1206 BC, and it gives a list of people he beat up. I took Ashkelon, I took and I whipped Israel. Ta-da! If a pharaoh is saying there's such a thing as Israel in 1206 BC, how could the conquest have happened in 1206 if Pharaoh is already seeing them as a nation to come in and conquer by then? So it doesn't work. So that's another strong evidence that Israel had been in the land and established enough for Pharaoh to think it's a big deal to whip them by 1206. This is from the 1400s BC, and it says I can't remember what it says now. Oh, here we go. Late 15th century BC, and it says the nomads of Yahweh. The nomads of Yahweh in the late 1400s BC. So that would be right at the wilderness wanderings time. And here's this monument in Egypt talking about the nomads of Yahweh. And so, I mean, I don't know what else you want. You know what I'm saying? It's another huge validation of the story, the way the Bible tells it. All right. All right, AI. Oh, AI, okay. And if you guys get tired of this and just done, you can just tell me you're done. But I could do this stuff all day. Khirbet El Makatir is the name of the site that is Ai. They used to think it was another place, but that didn't really fit anything. A hill about a mile away from right here. But it doesn't fit the right time. It fits the 1200 BC conquest narrative. And it was another reason that people said, oh, it didn't happen because this Ai wasn't at the right time. And then they walked a mile away and dug up another place and like, oh my goodness, this exactly fits and it's perfect. So there's Ai. That's what the fortress looked like. Oh, this is really what I want to show you at this location. So this thing up in the upper right-hand corner is, it's like a baseball card for pharaohs. That's about the best thing that I could give you for it. And pharaohs printed their own little seals that were like baseball cards for themselves that promoted their reign and who they were and all that other stuff, because nobody ever thought more of himself than a pharaoh did. So when you go and you dig up sites, one of the ways that you date a site is you date a site by what pharaoh's baseball cards are found in the junk pile. And that sounds insane, but that's exactly what happens. And so occasionally you can get a little mixed up and you're not sure, like, did another pharaoh make a commemorative baseball card of a former pharaoh, right? That's the argument that these guys have. They don't call them baseball cards. But that's the argument these guys had. This site at Ai was destroyed and burned to the ground right around 1406 BC, and lo and behold, it has a baseball card for a 15th century BC pharaoh, which is exactly what you'd expect to have if the Bible story is exactly the way it's supposed to be. So that's pretty cool. It's not the only one, but that's one of the, on the money evidences that Ai is what it's supposed to be, and it happened when it was supposed to have said to have happened. This dude right here, this is a socket for the gates. And so in the story of Joshua, the gates of the city and all that stuff kind of comes into play. They hang the king on the gate until sundown and then take his body down and everything. Well, one of the sockets for the old gate of the city is still there. And so, I don't know. I think that's a neat thing. Okay, I already said this. Yeah, okay. Palestinians, I already said this. Palestinians are heavily invested in the idea of no archaeological stuff validates the Bible. Professors who lean left with regard to the Bible also tend to be pro-Palestinian, and so you've got Hebrew professors of archaeology at Hebrew University in Israel who are anti-Bible archaeology. and because they sort of are gatekeepers for a lot of access and a lot of artifacts, well, that makes the whole thing just extremely difficult. And if you want to get published and if you want to be somebody in archaeology, well, then you're bucking the tide of important people who are not just gatekeepers to sites, but are academic gatekeepers. And so, one of the reasons why there's not a lot of archaeology that pursues stuff biblically is because it's just an uphill battle everywhere you go. This is from Ai. It is the head of, it looks like a bird to me, but it's a ram's head of an idol. And these are different pictures of it, and it's not very big. It's like the ram's head's about this big. And this is what it would have looked like. Wow, the one on the right is terrible. That gives you an idea of what it would have looked like whole. It's a very Egyptian-inspired idol of this ram's-headed god dude with his ankh and his staff. And this was found at Ai. But here's the kicker. This is the fun part. The idol is bronze, and so it would have been valuable and been one of the things that they'd take and melt down and keep. The idol had its head chopped off before the rest of it was taken. It appears that whoever took Ai in 1406 BC and burned it to the ground and wiped it out also cut the heads off of all the idols before they took the metal idols and kept them. Like, this is not something that other people would have done besides Israel, right? Because Jews are monotheists and they don't believe in idols and all that other stuff. Well, anybody else would have left the idol intact, right? And it could have been kind of like a collector's coin or something. It could have been just as valuable intact as an idol. Maybe they wanted it as an idol for themselves or to sell as an idol to somebody else because it's already a crafted piece. But for Israel, the idol had no value, and this is not the only place. But at Hazor, there's some of this also, and at Ai, you've got it. They decapitated idols. I think it's hilarious, right? They decapitated idols before they took them because they weren't even gonna take the idols for scrap and leave the heads on them. So that's pretty cool. By the way, I don't have any pictures of it up here, but in the Bible it says that when Hezekiah desecrated some of the pagan worship sites, that they turn them into latrines. We do actually have evidence of at least one site that was a former pagan worship site that Hezekiah built the ancient equivalent of a porta potty over so that nobody would ever use it as a pagan temple again. No kidding. Hezekiah, almost everything that Hezekiah ever did that the Bible says has been validated by archaeology, not just in like items, but actual words. A recent find we found is a monument in the area of Jerusalem that is just line by line, dates to the time of Hezekiah, that says Hezekiah did this, and he did this, and he did this, and he did this. And it's the same Hebrew of the Old Testament, and some of them are the very same words, like a tablet from Hezekiah's day that tells us that he did exactly the same stuff that the Old Testament tells us he did. Amazing. Okay. One of the things, I'm sorry, I'm talking a mile a minute. Missy's looking at me like, you need to shut up so people can ask questions. Anybody have any questions, comments, anything? This is all rapid fire. All right, I'm moving on. Feel free to stop me. The Amarna tablets. What have I covered? The Amarna tablets. Talk a little bit about language. Ooh, I'm glad you said that, Don. I would like to talk a little bit more about language. So, I talked about the lack of Yahweh's names in the first 5 books of the Bible and how that validates them being what they're supposed to be. The alphabet, the baseball cards. Way to go, man. Language. Abraham came from Ur of the Chaldees. Probably spoke Akkadian or Aramaic or something like that. Somewhere around, just ballpark numbers, 2000 BC, okay? He comes to Canaan, where all these people speak a variety of Western Semitic languages that are all very similar, like Hebrew. The language that Abraham spoke was a Semitic language, but different from the Western Semitic languages. It appears that what Abraham did is what lots of immigrants do, is he went to this new place and he learned to speak their language, maybe with a little different accent, maybe a few words here and there are different, and Hebrew is born out of Abraham taking the language of his birth that is in his brain and the language of the people that he moved into and which is one of the reasons why Hebrew is similar to all those other languages, okay? The book of Genesis can be broken up. You know, in Genesis it says, these are the generations of X, right? And these are the generations of whoever, and these are the generations of this. And the very first part is, these are the generations that heaven and the earth and days that they were created. These are the generations passages structure Genesis. And they probably were tablets, or probably cuneiform tablets, passed on probably by the patriarch that is named in the these are the generations of, right? So Abraham comes with this backlog of stuff working on Genesis, and it gets passed on, it goes to Joseph, and when you get to Joseph, the Hebrew of Genesis changes a little bit, and because Joseph is now, he's a full-blown Hebrew speaker, and he kind of puts together all of it and modernizes it, as it were, and then Moses gets a hold of that and takes all of that and turns it into something in the alphabet. Where's I going with this? Oh, okay, here it is. And Moses has the alphabet, and he makes the first 5 books of the Bible. All of that, what I just described to you, that little bit, is incredibly important, because if it didn't happen that way, which most modern scholars don't think it did, if it didn't happen that way, then the Bible is a fraud. It's just something made up by somebody. Everything about the language validates this. Things like the Song of Moses is in an old archaic version of Hebrew because it's poetry, and the Jews couldn't modernize it, right? They did the same thing we do. They took old King James Hebrew and they made it into NIV Hebrew, right, as time went on, until they got to the exile. And then they froze everything, right, because they lost to Jerusalem, they lost their sacrifice, they lost it all. And when that happened, they quit modernizing the Hebrew of the Old Testament. They quit NIVing it, and they just froze it there because they didn't want to lose anything. They didn't want to lose a letter. They didn't want to lose a syllable because they lost so much already. And so a lot of the Old Testament is frozen at that time of the exile Hebrew. But the poetry, for the most part, had to be left the way it was, right? Because if you ever translate poetry, you wreck it, right? And so you got stuff like the Song of Deborah and the Song of Moses that are super archaic Hebrew that may very well be syllable for syllable what Moses and Deborah said, which is crazy and kind of incredible. You get even a modern Hebrew was built off of sort of biblical Hebrew, is reverse engineered, right? Modern Hebrew was reverse engineered from biblical Hebrew. And so modern Hebrew speakers and readers can mostly just pick up the Old Testament, even though it's different from modern, and just read it and be fine and just work their way through and occasionally have a little hiccup or something, kind of like you read Shakespeare, right? You pick up read Shakespeare, there's a weird word here and there, something, but it's fine. Until you get to things like the Song of Deborah. And then, I mean, it's easier for them than it is for us, but then they're wrecked. It's like a train wreck for a modern Hebrew reader because it's so different, because it's so old, because it's that very archaic Hebrew from the time of the conquest and Moses and all that. And it validates the age of the Old Testament, and it says that these things were put pen to paper at the time the Bible acts like they were, right? So, all right, now, 2 more things. One is something that I thought about mentioning this in the sermon, but I don't know how to do it. People always whine and cry about Israel killing off all the people in Canaan, right? Oh, it's genocide and exterminating people and blah, 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 and why they got to kill men, women, and children. And I just can't find it in my heart to get very excited about that. Because if God had just sent a plague and killed everybody in Canaan before Israel went there, would those same people be crying about it? No, they would not. They'd just accept it. Like, God sent a plague, kill all the people in Canaan, and then it was empty, and Israel could walk in. But because God used the Jews to do it, well, then that's problematic. It's not problematic to me. Everybody who dies because God killed them in one way or another. It's just the way, yeah, they're dead, and we're all going to die, and it's because God said so, and He kept us from the tree, and there was sin, and it just is what it is. He's either God or He's not. So I haven't done that. I haven't talked about it in a sermon, but it is a thing. This is in Carthage. And this, what I'm about to read to you, is from a Greek writer from the 3rd century BC. So, Canaan is Phoenicia. You've heard of the Phoenicians. Canaan is Phoenicia, and Phoenicia is Carthage. All right, Hannibal, who took the elephants and crossed the Alps and attacked Rome and all that, his culture and religion flow all the way back to the Canaanites. Right? The Canaanites are the Phoenicians, and the Phoenicians are the Carthaginians. So, in Carthage, in the 3rd century BC, this guy, Cleitarchus, a Greek writer, said, out of reverence for Kronos, which is what the Greeks call Baal Hammon, the lord of the fire pit, the Phoenicians, and especially the Carthaginian ones, whenever they seek to obtain some great favor, vow one of their children, burning it as a sacrifice to the deity if they are especially eager to gain success. There stands in their midst a bronze statue of Baal Hammon, its hands extended over a bronze brazier, the flames of which engulf the child. There are 20,000 graves of children, mostly children, a few lambs, small lambs and stuff that maybe were substitutes for children by people who could work it that way. 20,000 children that the Carthaginians offered burned alive. So when the Bible says stuff like, you shall not make your children pass through the fire to Molech, that's what we're talking about here. And when God says to Abraham, the sin of the Canaanites has not yet reached its full measure, well, by the time Israel got to Canaan, it had. It got to that there are about half a dozen or a dozen times in the first 5 books of the Bible that God warns them as they're going into this land not to make their children pass through the fire. Right, not to offer your children alive. Big bronze altar. This is what they think. We're not really sure because big bronze things don't last because people melt them down because they have value. Big bronze statue, arms outstretched, big fire inside, blazing hot. Toss the child onto the things and tumbles into the furnace. And this is another reason why I didn't talk about it on Sunday morning because it's not really for the kids. And so, I don't know how to see some poor child run out crying after I tell them about all this stuff. The Canaanites were, this is more of the same stuff. Here we go. You must not worship the Lord your God in their way, because in worshiping their gods, they do all kinds of detestable things the Lord hates. They even burn their sons and daughters in the fire as sacrifice to their gods. That's plain as day. And we have plenty, the later in the prophets it mentions the Tophet, probably the same thing. Our word Gehenna probably comes from a place that practiced this stuff, Baal Hinnom or something like that. This is the cream of the crop for how bad they were. There's lots of other stuff I could tell you. They have a whole book of dream interpretations about what different dreams. If you dreamed you had sex with a goat, it means this. If you dreamed you had sex with a cow, it means this. If you dreamed you had sex with the XYZ animals, they needed a book, apparently, for that. Did you just imagine what's going on if you need a book to tell you if that's what you're dreaming about, what it means for your life? This is who they were. It was crazy. In fact, there are laws that talk about what animals you can't have sex with, what animals you can't have sex with, and why. Canaan was uniquely unbelievable. Other cultures had human sacrifice and child sacrifice on rare occasions in extreme circumstances. These guys practiced it routinely by the time that Joshua and these guys were going in here, which is crazy. What is this here? Let's see. Oh, there it is. All right. Here's the other part of why I think they had to go. And this is where it gets weird. All right. You're like, that was weird. Well, this is exceptionally weird. The Canaanites seem to have been the last people group who had anything left of the Nephilim in them, right? The flood was there to wipe out evil humanity and everything, but really, it had to happen because of the Nephilim, right? I want to go ahead and I'm going to give the story away and tell you, I believe that that Genesis is plain as day, that somehow or another, fallen angels came to earth, took human form somehow or another, had sex with human women, and they had mutant super babies, all right? It sounds nuts, but I don't know another way to read the text. And we could get into the details of all that some of the time, but I'm pretty sure that's what Genesis is telling us is going on. Yeah, it says they were giants. Do you know what the Greek translation of the word for giants in Hebrew says? It says they were titanos. They were the titans, and the titans were sort of mythological gods out of Greek culture. And when Jews who spoke Greek wanted to translate who those people were so that Greeks would understand, they said that they were titans, and that's what they meant. What the Jews meant was, you got these stories of titans. Here's who they really are. And so, I don't know the way to get around it. So anyhow, somehow the DNA of these people, creatures, whatever, makes it through the ark. I guess maybe Noah's kids' wives or something. I don't know. I mean, I want to blame it on his kids' wives because I got nobody else. Somehow it did. Somehow it makes it through the ark. And we know that it's in Canaan. Several times we're told they're the descendants of the Anakites or the Rephaites or all these people that are associated with the Nephilim. And not only does the Bible tell us these guys are giants, this is an account from the Egyptians that says they went down into Canaan and they fight these Canaanite warriors, and they were giants. It says they were between 6'6", they were between about 6.5 feet tall and 8.5 feet tall. The people that the Egyptians say that they encountered and fought. And so that's iffy because, everybody's going to brag about how big the guy was that they whooped. But here's something that is unusual. In a carving about one of these times, you've got normal-sized Egyptians who are subduing gigantic figures in the middle from Canaan that would fit the size that they've said in the thing earlier. This is unusual because Egyptians never made their enemies giants in their figures. And in fact, most of the time, the only people who got to be giants in their drawings were either pharaohs or gods, right? They carved gigantic people, but they were usually only pharaohs or gods. And that was, I don't know if it's a rule, but that's pretty much what they did. And so the fact that you have subdued Canaanite peoples who are drawn as giants is strong evidence that, at least from the Egyptian perspective, that's what they thought they were. All right. Today we did Lachish. This is from Lachish. It's only about an inch big. It is a milk. This was a milk bowl. This is one side and the other of a milk bowl. It's a milk bowl. It's called an ostrakhan, which is a chip of pottery that somebody wrote on or painted on. In this case, the painting on here is hard to see, but it's in old Paleo Hebrew, and it says they found it in the rubble in Lachish. It says the servant. It's a milk bowl, and it says on it the servant in charge of honey. So what happened is when they invaded Lachish, I guess Joshua got wise about watching out for plunder and everything, and he assigned different people to be you're the guy who's in charge of making sure that when we get the honey out, we gather it all up and we divvy it up even and all that, and you're in charge of getting the grain out, and you're in charge of getting this out. Well, as they were raiding Lachish, the guy who was the servant in charge of honey dropped his badge, and we dug it up and we found it, and from 1400 BC. I think it's pretty cool because God told them that he was going to take them to a land of milk and honey. And here's a milk bowl with the servant in charge of honey written on it. That's kind of neat. And also it goes to the fact that the Jews could write at this time. Well, this is what the language thing is. One of the big deals about when I was in college, one of the things that they said was these guys are all illiterate. There's no way they could write. There's no way they could produce the Old Testament. It had to have been hundreds and hundreds of years later because there's no way that the Jews of 1400 BC could have produced this kind of literature. Well, the more we dig up, the more that looks like nonsense. Joshua holds up what is most English translations say is a javelin. The Hebrew word is kophesh. This is an Egyptian kophesh. And I think it's more likely that this is what Joshua had. Their swords were curved. Everywhere in the Bible where it says that they put them to the edge of the sword, they put them to the mouth of the sword. I think there's something theological to that, but I don't know what to do with it. There's a lot of mouth in Joshua. Israel, all the nations of Canaan got together with one mouth against Joshua and Israel, and then it says they did not consult the mouth of the Lord when the Gibeonites came. There's a lot of that, a lot of the word mouth in Joshua, and like I said, no, one of these days somebody will write the definitive book on mouth in Joshua, and what I'll do what? I don't think it does. I don't, because those are different words that are associated with it. That's not a bad question, no. This is the altar at Mount Ebal. I think I said something about it. Josh, this is probably Deborah's altar, or from Deborah's time. But this is the site where Joshua set up the altar of uncut stones and wrote the law on the stones, and they did the curses and the blessings. This is Ebal. This is that spot. There are less stones there now because Palestinians said we're going to build a road, and so they just robbed a bunch of stones from that and ground them up for gravel for a road. Thank you very much. But in the center of that, by the way, that altar dates to about 1200 BC by the pharaonic baseball cards. But then there's a layer underneath that where there's a little tiny, not tiny, about yay big, circular altar, and that altar is older. It dates back to about 1400 BC, and they've seen that some archaeologist has seen the stones that Joshua set up on Ebal, which is, it's incredible. I don't know. I think it's incredible. And so this gives you an idea of the complex and what they've dug up and all that stuff. And this is that Bible.ca guy again. It's another shot of it. People have, at least one archaeologist has been killed working this site. And so it is dangerous. This is an artist's conception of what it would have looked like, the sort of time of Deborah altar, right? You've got the altar proper in the center and the horns of the altar, and I don't know, that's kind of goofy right there, but that's what the person, somebody would have walked up there like that and gave the offering. That way people all around can see and everything. Now, yeah, it's a statue. It's, like I said, it's kind of weird. I don't know, it looks creepy to me, but yeah, it's a statue there to give you some idea of how the person would have walked up there, the path they would have taken. So in the time of Deborah, this altar on Ebal was functional, and at some point, everything moves to Shiloh. By the time you get to Samuel, that stuff's at Shiloh. But there's one incredible find out of here, and this is the queen of all of it to me. And that is a lead in the rubble of this thing right here. In 1980, can't remember the guy's name. The guy excavated this and found it. But when he excavated it, he took all of his rubble and he didn't wet sift it. He just set it aside and was looking for big stuff. And later, a team came and they started wet sifting all of the rubble. And in the wet sifting of the rubble, they found this, and it's about an inch by an inch. And it's a lead curse tablet. And you're like, that sounds weird. Oh yeah, maybe it is. And this is what it looks like on its side, and one side and the other. And it was found at the site. And they, at first, they were just trying to figure out what was on the outside of it and everything. But now they've got scanners that can penetrate the lead. Unlike Superman's X-ray vision, they have scanners that can penetrate the lead, and it can read what's on the inside of it without unfolding it and tearing it up. And what they found is incredible. So this is in Paleo Hebrew, dating back probably the time of Joshua, the name of Yahweh. And it only had 3 letters, and sometimes the Jews spell it with 3 letters, sometimes they spell it with four consonants. But this is it, and it reads, this is funny, because it reads from left to right. At this time, they weren't set on which direction they wrote in. Sometimes you can dig up a piece of something that has something written on it, and they'll start one way, and they'll go back the other, and then go back the other, and go back the other, and go back the other. And finally they settled on right to left, which is Hebrew does today. But this one is from left to right, and this is Yah, Ha. That's the H. Remember he telling me about the H, the man with his hands up? That's the letter H, and it's because it's the word for halal, for praise, and praise is this guy with his hands up. That's literally it. Right? The old Egyptian hieroglyph looks more like touchdown guy, right? But this one is just straight up like that. YHW, Yahweh. And that is the name of the Lord, and it's inscribed in this tablet from Joshua's time. What somebody did, and I'll get to exactly what the tablet says in a minute. What somebody did is inscribed the curse on it and then put it on this altar to kind of seal the deal, right? Job, in the book of Job, it mentions this idea. Job said, "Oh, that my words were written on a tablet of lead with an iron pen." Well, that's exactly what this is. But what it says is this: cursed, 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 cursed by God Yahweh. You will die, cursed, cursed, you will surely die, cursed by Yahweh, cursed, cursed, cursed. Well, that sounds kind of crazy to us. But if you read the curses that they were to give from Mount Ebal, that's not a stretch at all. Actually, it's more like a summary of what happens. And so it's entirely possible that somebody, either in the process of this ceremony or in something else like it, maybe a reaffirmation of it, etched this with a hard metal pen of bronze or iron in the soft lead, folded it up, and put it on the altar with the offering. Now, what's amazing about that is this is absolute direct proof, not only that they could read and write at almost 1400 BC, but far more importantly is the structure of what's on this lead. This is what's called a chiasm. You see it all through the New Testament. The chiasm comes from the Greek letter chi, which is shaped like an X, and because I don't know, whatever, it looks like that, that's like half an X this way. And this is, it's like an iambic pentameter for Shakespeare. It just shows up everywhere in the Old Testament, chiasm does. It's a way to help remember stuff. It's a literary structure that helps you to see, what the most important part is. And so the first line and the last line are parallel, right? And then the next line and the next to the last line are parallel. And then the two lines in the middle are parallel, right? That's what a chiasm is. It's A prime, B prime, C prime. We could literally do nothing for the next month but dig out chiasms out of the Old Testament and identify them. And you wouldn't burn them all up. The creation account has lots of this stuff in them that are really interesting. But this is one of the big deal literary structures of the Old Testament. And it proves whoever wrote this had the literary ability to write the entire Old Testament. Which means that the literary ability to write the Old Testament existed in the early 14th century BC among the Jewish people. And so nobody can ever say, "Oh, they could have been written then because they didn't have it." We have it. We don't just have a word. We don't just have an ABC book where somebody's writing their ABCs. We don't just have a pottery with an inscription on it. We have a literary document that proves that they had the skill and the knowledge to create the Old Testament, at least in the 14th century BC in the land of Canaan in Israel. So if you were to say, and also, it's evidence of it's the oldest by Jews written down of the name of Yahweh anywhere. This is it. And it was just found 3 years ago out of a dump pile that somebody went through. Yeah. And yeah. Yeah. Maybe it may have been these. Yeah, that may have been the pens or something like that for the animals. I don't know I don't know all the details of it. I just threw that in there because somebody tried to recreate what it would have looked like, at the time. But I think you're right, Patty. I think that's what that is. All right. So there you go. That's all, folks. Yeah. It had spray paint on it. Yeah. That stone, so when Joshua conquers Hazor, he sets up some kind of a memorial standing stone there, and that is probably it. Yeah, and like I said, it's been defaced and graffitied and everything. So there you go. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate this. I love this stuff, but as you can see, it doesn't flow smoothly or fit tidily in a sermon, and so I was glad to get to talk about it. You bet. Thank you, guys. Woohoo!